Thank you very much indeed, and good evening, everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you and to share my experiences with you about African wild dogs and to share some of the latest research that's going on in South Africa and throughout Africa to do with the dogs, and to talk to you about them and to answer your questions about African wild dogs. The first question, firstly, for me, an endangered species with only 6,600 left in the world, and within South Africa, only about 550 dogs. So we are looking at a super endangered species here. And this particular scene that you're looking at really touched me when I saw this young wild dog pup investigating an elephant skull. And I thought, yeah, the vulnerability of our wildlife really needs to be considered. And do they have longevity? Also, I'll be talking a little bit about my book, because that came out last year and it has connections to Bristol. So that I'll be talking about later, and to England, with Merlin Unwin being my publishers. So I'll come to that towards the end. But in the meantime, let's have a look at why wild dogs. Whoops. I'm essentially a wildlife photographer, but about 10 years ago, I first encountered the wild dog. And I was sitting in a safari vehicle focusing on, there was a warthog of all things. So they're little warthogs, they're not great animals that you do exciting things with as photographs. And suddenly there was this flash. And I was like, what was that? And that was my first encounter with wild dog, and it was in Botswana. And I just was like, what is this tricolored animal? And we followed, of course, we then went bunda bashing, going through the bundu, over tree stumps to track with the dogs. And they move incredibly quickly. They have these long, spindly legs and lean, lithe bodies, and they move at a dramatic pace. Well, and I was also fascinated by their three colors. I was fascinated by the shapes of their ears. We can see the dog in the top right-hand corner with almost satellite-shaped ears, and yet the one on the left, his ears are almost, you know, quite narrow and pointed. Now, the one in the middle, of course, is very strange. She's got very pointed ears. That's more a pup. But even from puppy, their ears are round. So he was strange, but so cute. And there's nothing uncute about an African wild dog. Some people say, oh, they're so mean looking. No, they're not. They're intense and they're curious. So it's a case of having a look for the curiosity and to find the light in their eyes. I've had encounters with them when they're sniffing my toes, and they're curious. I never felt threatened. I didn't feel in danger. I felt just really comfortable. I felt more curious as well, thinking, goodness me, this dog seems to know who I am, and I'm still trying to find out who it is. Wild dogs are very, very close in family, and this is what also endeared me to them. They are very close. They're tactile. They're forever licking and touching and rubbing up against each other. They'd be hopeless at this time. They don't wear masks. So they are, and the way they feed their young is through licking and through suggesting. That's how the pup gets the adult to regurgitate food for it, because they will lick the mouth and the adult knows that the pups want to eat, but the pups want to eat all the time. I mean, like all our dogs at home, they all want to keep eating, but especially in the wild. And these are adult dogs. So you can see the three colors, the white on their spindly long legs, the caramel color, and then of course the dark colored around patching. And the uniqueness of each animal is also something to take note of. So they are terrific. They do, when we are doing a dog count, or when organizations on the ground are doing a dog count, they get the public who are on safari to take photographs between two dates, and then to submit those photographs. And they can always see the difference between the dogs because of their coloring and their patterning. And so we can do the count that way. It's a fascinating way of doing a count, but family matters with the dogs. What you have in front of you is a pack of wild dogs who are meeting, well, these are part of the pack, they're meeting this little mite for the very first time. Now, the wild dog has a hierarchy. An alpha male and an alpha female run the pack. The alpha male and alpha female are actually selected by the pack. And this particular pack, the Nyakasanga pack, they're in Maniples, Zimbabwe. They lost their alpha female. The alpha male mated with a daughter of his, which is extremely unusual. She was 2-year-old. He was killed by a hyena, one of the main predators of wild dogs. And she went to her maternal den, which is what the dogs do. She gave birth to 5 pups, and she ran the pack. Even when there's an alpha male and an alpha female, it is the females who make the decisions. Good for the females. So yeah, and I went to visit this den quite a few times, I would say 5 or 6 times, and each time the pack had been out hunting. If they came back, she would come out of the den, she'd crawl out, and the alpha female, and they would regurgitate for her. So that's how she would eat. But they wanted to see the new generation because they instinctively know that that is their survival. It's the survival of their genetic inheritance. It's the new next generation. And they would call and they would whine and they would whinge and she would just ignore them. And then one day, they came back without anything. She was furious. She came out, she was looking for food. Of course, she's feeding 5 pups. She's hungry. She can't go hunting herself. She has to control the pups, control the pack. And she was really not happy. And she just, I don't know, there was a whole dog conference, and they just went and lay down, and they don't move much in the heat of the day. So from about 9 o'clock in the morning, they were what we call flat dogs. They went out. I was back at the den the next morning, and they had food. So they fed her, and as a reward, you could hear these little babies squeaking inside. They were ready to come up and meet their aunts and uncles. And there was this little creepy character coming over the lip of the den, and there it came out. Now you'll notice the coloring of the mite. It is just black and white. They develop the 3rd color as they grow older. But the love and the adoration and the passion with which, and the gentleness with which these so-called vicious animals, they're really not vicious at all, met this little baby. They sniffed it, they licked it, they loved it, until Mom decided, this is Violet, she decided, oh no, time out, back into the den, and she unceremoniously carried her young back in. She picked them up either by a tail or by a leg, or this one by its head, and popped it back into the den. Here, I was fortunate, you don't always see it. A pup, you'll see, is in all of those who do yoga, downward dog position, looking up saying, please, may I have food? Now, all the adults will feed the pups. The pups are too young to go to a kill. So they're generally left behind with a nursemaid, and the dogs will go off, they'll hunt, and their kill is very quick. They disembowel, they kill the animal very fast, and they then strip it. of all the soft flesh. They ingest very, very quickly, and they'll come back to feed the pups. And the pups, to get the food, will start licking them around the mouth. Pups love to play, and you'll just see a very soft look of mana pools in the background. It's a beautiful, beautiful part of Africa. Just very beautiful trees, soft color, and pups playing. But it's not just the pups who play, it's the adults who play as well. Gaming and game on is a very, very, very important part of a wild dog's life. In this image, taken from my book, you can see they're creeping up the bank. What you can't see on the left is a game that's happening where the dogs are playing each other. They're playing with each other. There's a whole game going on, and these two are now finding their way in. They're strategic about everything they do. These are very, very intelligent animals. They are strategic. They are waiting their moment when they'll charge in and they'll participate in the game. Wild dogs, like children, love to play with toys. So they've always got a toy, and if one gets the toy, the other one wants it. They are, again, strategic. They will wait, or they'll hang on to a piece of the toy. In this particular image taken in Tanzania, the dog on the left grabbed onto the stick, and the one on the right waited for the one on the left to just change its bite position slightly and pull the stick out of its mouth, and then ran off with it. So yeah. Here we can see the dogs are playing shoulder stands, and the ones in the background are gaming. So shoulder stands are very, very popular amongst dogs because, and they, like our home pets, they bite, but they don't bite hard enough to rip the flesh. Sometimes they do. They're not angels. Sometimes they do. And you can see the one in the middle, his eyes are wide open because the other one's biting his leg. That's sore, sore. But even a feather becomes an object of desire. And this was just such fun to see these adults charging around, charging after each other, wanting to grab that feather and make off with it. And like our dogs at home, they like to scratch. They get fleas. Of course, it's the bush. They're sand fleas. And yeah, they irritate. So the dogs scratch and roll on their backs and kick their legs in the air, just like normal dogs. I think what I keep referring to normal dogs. So I want to really make this point. Wild dogs are not dogs that have gone feral. Wild dogs are genetically, the assumption is that they are linked to the gray wolf. They started diverging from the gray wolf 1.5 million years ago. So can you really say they're still part of that line? They're canids for sure, but they're not gray wolves. So to call the wild dog a painted wolf is a misnomer. The wild dog is highly adaptive, and to have survived 1.7 million years of adaptation and still be alive today, yeah, that's telling. In the cradle of mankind, there is a dig, and in that dig, a skeleton, a part of a skull was found, a jawbone was found, and then part of the head of an animal was found, and the two went together, and there were teeth in the jawbone. And to an archaeologist and to a geneticist, the teeth give them all sorts of wonderful clues. And once this was found by Prof. Berger from the University of Witwatersrand, anthropologist, they then went and did a search for which animal genetically was closest to the skull and to the remnants that they found, these artifacts that they found. And sorry, not artifacts, remnants. And they found that the closest, although what they found was an animal that was larger, but closest to the African wild dog. So it was obviously part of its adaptation process that it was a much larger animal and has now become smaller. Just a little take back into history. So when people talk to you about painted wolves, it's African wild dog. That's what his name is, or that's what its name is. African wild dogs are, the name, it's got many names. It's called Cape hunting dog, it's called painted dogs. And how that evolved was that when a lot of tourists came to Africa and they saw this animal and they said, was it feral? No, it's not feral. So it's a wild dog. Is it, why is it called a wild dog? And oh, they're so vicious. No, we don't like to associate the viciousness of the wild dog with our pet pooches at home. So can we find another name? And they called it painted dog, which no, we don't think, those of us in true blood don't want to call it a painted dog at all, because it is a wild dog and it's genetically certified to be a wild dog. What do they do when they're not hunting, playing, feeding? They crowd each other and they sleep. So from about 9 in the morning, African sun gets very hot and they crowd in the shade. And what they will do is they'll keep moving. As the shade moves, they move with the shade. So a dog will get up and lie down and the rest will come. And you can see in this photograph, they lie on top of each other, even in the heat of the day. The interesting thing is at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, one of the dogs will get up and will stretch and will go up to the others and give a little sneeze. Now, depending on where the dog is in the hierarchy of the pack, the number of sneezes that dog will give determines its hierarchy and will determine how fast the sleeping pack will respond. If it's a low member of the pack, low-level member, that dog will have to sneeze many times before the rest of the pack will wake up and go, oh, do we really have to do this? If it's the alpha sneezes once. I used the word sneeze. Yes, the dog gives up, they sneeze. And research was done, and this research is reported in my book. It was done in Botswana. And what they found, that's how we know such detail about the power of the alpha, whether it's male or female, and the sneeze. And the article was called Sneeze to Leave. So between 5:30, the dogs wake up. Generally by 5:30, they're awake. They have a ceremony. The dogs love ceremonies. They wake up, they check the number of dogs, they check the number in the pack, they check all the puppies are there, they get together, they kiss, they rub up against each other, and the alpha or one of the lead dogs will go, time to go, and off they go. Just wonderful light in mana pools. I took a lot of my photographs in mana pools because you can get out the vehicle, you can walk, and you can sit in the dirt. And those give you the best photographs. So the light was just catching their tails and filtering through, and off they were going for the hunt. And their hunting is quick. They will track, they will roll in their prey's dung to get the smell of the animal that they're hunting. It's usually an impala, they'll get that on them. And so that if they're upwind, that's fine, but if they're downwind, they want the animal to smell, not the wild dog, they want them to smell the impala, and so the impala won't run away too fast, but the impala are smart. The dogs have got to work. Dogs usually feed twice a day, and especially when they're pups, because the adults get hungry, and if they're feeding the pups, they've got to have quite a lot of food. So they will hunt twice a day. Their hunting, as I say, is quick. They are so fast. If you're on foot, there's no way that you'll keep up with them. If you're in a vehicle, you go careering after them and generally lose them and hope to goodness you can find them. If you've got telemetry and linked to one of the dogs that's collared, you have a likelihood of tracking to the area where they are, and then you've got to have a jolly good driver who can get past all stumps and run over bushes, etc. Just talking a little bit about dogs in reserves and free-ranging dogs, and what is this whole situation with dogs? And I'm talking money here, because we know that keeping wildlife, looking after our wildlife, is costly. In South Africa, there are 4 packs of free-ranging wild dogs left, and they're in the Waterberg, which is it's about 3.5 hours drive northwest of Johannesburg. In the rest of Africa, all the dogs are free-ranging. And when I say Africa, I'm talking south of the Congo. I'm talking Botswana, I'm talking Angola, Zambia, Namibia, Tanzania, and Mozambique now, and Malawi. So that's really where the stronghold of dogs is. To put a collar on the packs of dogs, and we now have mainly, most free-ranging packs of dogs have been collared. So there's a tremendous amount of research. And I was just between, in the last 5 years, the amount of research coming out has been exponential. The amount of researchers going into the field has become so popular. And I'll tell you a very, very exciting piece of news towards the end of my talk about precisely that for anyone who's interested in research and researching dogs. So to put a collar on a dog to be able to track the pack, one needs upward of 35,000 for one collar, but that does include the collar, the battery, which has to last a long time, the link to the telemetry, link to a computer program which can track the movement of the pack. So there's back office. Looking after the dogs, if one dog gets distemper, you can virtually say goodbye to the pack. So this is where the research is so important, because they're tracking the dogs, and if they see the collar dog is not moving very far or very much, they know something's wrong and they immediately go out to check out. Especially snaring, desnaring, dogs got to be darted. That's a cost. The vet's got to do it. Some of the researchers and people running organizations in the field, they are licensed to dart, but it still needs people. And a lot of the organizations have got desnaring teams which need to be fed, and the desnarers perform such an important job, because a snare to a wild animal is terrible. It's really, it's just ghastly. I mean, we know of dogs that have chewed off their legs to get out of a snare. The dog is not the target, it's the bush meat that's the target. So it's the impala, it's a herbivore that's the target. But the way the snare is set up, the dogs get caught. For South Africa, there's a big problem with the dogs in reserves. They're high maintenance. The reserves have got electric fences around them, but those reserves that now have pangolins, they can't have the lowest string of electric current going through the fence, because the pangolin will zip itself around that and electrocute itself. So that gets switched off. But the dogs will dig. So the dogs are smart. I went to look for dogs once, and I was told, yes, we could go tracking the dogs. So I arrived at the lodge after a day's travel to be told that the dogs had left the day before. They had dug under the fence, which had been switched off because this reserve now had pangolin, and they had taken up residence in the next door reserve. So we got permission, we got into the next door reserve, because I wanted to photograph them. So we got into the reserve, and no, they weren't there. They had chased an impala several times up against a fence, several impalas, and eventually one had gone through the fence, and they had killed it on the other side of the fence, which was community land. Now that's lethal for the dogs. The communities hate the dogs, they don't understand the dogs. those communities where no education has happened, and they generally, the dogs are not scared of, the dogs are not after the people. They might take out a goat, a sheep, and why not? You know, sheep standing there, they'll take it out. They don't have to go hunting. But the people are terrified of the dogs, and they will stone them. So we had to get the dogs back in off community land, which we did. We threw the carcass back over. I didn't have watched all of this, but the carcass was thrown back into the second reserve, and the fence was closed up. The dogs took up residence in that reserve. They liked it so much they denned for the second time, which is very, very unusual. They usually only have one litter of pups a year, but they decided to have two, and then they were being wooed back to their original home. So breakouts are costly. Breakouts mean financial compensation to farmers. If a goat, a sheep, or a prize herbivore, there's a lot of, in the area where the free-ranging wild dogs are in South Africa, there are a lot of reserves in the area with prize herbivores. There is just, that's another story. And if that gets, one of those get taken out, there's compensation that needs to be paid. So people are creating funds for their organization, especially to compensate. But then you've got to have evidence and you've got to have proof. So that's a whole procedure where you go to the chief of the group who's complaining. They'll say that the animals took out one of their prize sheep or calf or whatever it was, and they've got to prove that it was the dogs. So that's a very interesting human interface as a result of wild dog activity. So we're looking at vet fees, anything from 800 Rand. 800 Rand in sterling is about divided by 20, so you've got about 40 pounds a visit, plus helicopter, plus. So we are talking big bucks to keep wild dogs on wild dogs. But now again, I want to mention relocation, because to grow wild dog packs, we can't do it all in South Africa. We've been very successful, and we've got very, very supportive reserves. In the Kalahari, there are very supportive reserves and very successful reserves where they're willing to give up some of their dogs because their packs are getting large. When I say they're getting large, they're getting to about 15 to 20 dogs. In the good old days, right at the turn of the 1900s, about 1800s to about 1914, we had packs of 30 wild dogs roaming Africa. And that was when the great white hunters came into Africa. They set up Kenya. They brought in their livestock. And it was Morn, C.S. Morn, who was a prolific writer, and he was a hunter. He was in Kenya and Tanzania, and he just said, no, these farmers the farmers have got it hard enough, and these dogs are taking out their sheep and their cattle. This is vermin. Labeled the dogs vermin, and they started eradicating the dogs. That was easy for them to do because they didn't have to use their ammunition. They waited for the dogs to den. Dogs always go back to their maternal dens, invariably. Not always, but invariably go back to their maternal dens. And they would, in those days, they would blow up the dens with all the pups. That's still going on in northern Namibia today. It is just a nightmare, but that seems to be the only place where it's happening. In all the other countries, there is, certainly in South Africa, the dogs are protected. In Zambia, they're protected. In Zimbabwe, they're protected. So slowly it's growing. Their protection is growing because people are starting to realize how fascinating they are. And again, the research has started. It started with Dr. Jane Goodall and her late husband, whose name escapes me for the moment. Somebody can remember it and put it up. That would be fantastic. Thank you. And they were in Tanzania, and they wrote the first two books on wild dogs. They co-authored the first book, and the second book, Dr. Jane Goodall, she wasn't a doctor at that stage, Jane Goodall at that stage, she wrote the foreword to the book. And after that, the research was very slow. But in the last 10 years, it's escalated. And in the last 5 years, we've got so many papers coming out, and it's exciting. It's a lot of exciting work going on. Wild dog pup can read. As I told you, they're highly intelligent, so they can read. This is the only picture I have of a kill. The animal is stunned. The pups, you can see the young are feeding, and the adults are standing back. That's how it works in the wild dog pack. They're the only predator that does that. The lions will clup the little ones out of the way, and you see many, many lion cubs looking scrawny and thin and starving because the big daddy eats first and the little ones eat last. So the wild dogs get full marks for that. Now, wild dogs are wily and they're clever and smart. So this group of wildebeest was standing around. Now you can see the calves in the image. The wild dogs split up the pack. There were 9 of them in the pack. And the one running out of screen, we don't know male or female, it had come around the back of the wildebeest group. And you can see how it had run between them, because what they were trying to do was get them to separate so that the calves would be vulnerable. And then the dogs would go in and attack. But no, that was not going to happen this time. In fact, this wildebeest, shame, poor wildebeest. There's a story in the bush that says when God made the animals, he was left with a whole lot of bits. So he put the wildebeest together. So they're not considered to be terribly smart. But this wildebeest had had enough of the wild dogs and gave chase. And it was exciting to see such an unusual sighting in the bush of a wild dog being chased by a wildebeest. Of course, the wild dog got away. Wildebeest is far too heavy and clumsy, can't chase a wild dog. But it did put up speed, kicked up some dust, but the dog got away. So my contributing scientists and conservationists, and they are doing such amazing work. So on the far left is Dr. Peter Apps, who's working in Botswana with the Botswana Predator Conservation Trust, being renamed Wild in Trust. And his bio boundary project is well worth researching on the web if that's something that interests you. I've been talking a lot about human-wildlife conflict, and it's for the wild dog, it's taking out the predators taking out the game, the cattle and the sheep and the goats. And what Peter has done is he has tracked the wild dog through using remote cameras. They've seen how they mark territory, and the dogs can roam up to 2,000 kilometers. So they roam vast distances, but they do have boundaries, and they mark their boundaries with urine, and it's the alpha male and alpha female that do the marking. Peter picked up on this using remote cameras. He then synthetically has developed this substance, which they have put in on kraals. Kraal is an enclosure where the indigenous farmer will put his cattle and his sheep and his goats for the night, hoping to keep the predators out. And Peter's bio-boundary spray keeps them out. They walk right past. Even a honey badger, which is possibly one of the sharpest and snarliest and most vicious of all animals in the bush, ran right past it. So thank you, Peter. Let's hope that you go from strength to strength and that goes out into the world of the bush. Then we've got Scott Creel. Scott looked at, he's done amazing research, publishes regularly on predators and the work that he has done. And in his article in the book discusses lions and how the wild dog can get away from lions, because lions are the main perpetrators of killing. Lions and hyenas are the two predators who will not prey on wild dogs, but they'll make jolly sure that they take out as many pups as they can. So they'll go to the dens and they'll try and take out the pups. And when the pups come out of the dens at 3 months old and a hyena tracks after them, those pups can be taken out so fast. I was in Zambia 2 months ago. There were 10 pups in a litter. There were 2 females, unusual situation. 10 pups, and there are 2 left, all taken out by a lion. So we have Dr. Harriet Davies Mostard. She started the range programs in and relocation programs in South Africa, which was working amazingly well. We have now sent 2 packs of dog to Mozambique, and they have done so well there that we were able to take, I identify because my organization supports all of these organizations, and they were able to take a pack from Mozambique and a pack from South Africa and relocate them. For the first time in 75 years, there are now dogs in Malawi. So that is just fantastic news, just fantastic. Renee Walker, she did the research on sneeze to leave. And of course, then there's Nick Murray, who looks after, and Nick Murray has got a wonderful article in the book where he's been tracking the Nyakasanga pack. You saw them with the baby. He's been tracking with them for about 15 years, and he has given us the genetic line of that pack in the book. So Scott's Creel talked about the lions, and of course, lions walking through water is just so unusual. This was just a moment. We wanted to see, this was in Botswana, we wanted to see lions walking through water, and we got lion walking through water. I do want to tell you that there were 2 females he'd been tracking for a couple of days on the other bank, so there was motivation. As I was saying, hyenas track wild dogs. They will come and they will disturb them at a kill. If there's one hyena, and this one thought it was being really crafty, but the dogs had made sharp shift of their prey, of their kill, and this hyena didn't stand much chance. But generally, if there's one hyena, they will, the dogs will literally chase it off. Here, there was the whole pack had eaten. There were just dogs nibbling at the carcass, and this hyena came in to take what was left. The dogs gave it a bit of a rev, and biting the hyena's fleshy bum is the way the dogs get rid of the hyena. But it had got the bit of the carcass, but that was okay. The dogs were having some fun. Why have I taken this photograph? And the photographer I was with said to me, Jocelyn, why are you taking a photograph of the dog making a wee in a puddle? So you never know when it's necessary. And the way we put the book together was we added this picture to Peter Apps' Bioboundary Project, because that's how they mark their territory, not in the puddle, but yes, and the photograph was appropriately placed. Climate change. Dr. Rosie Woodruff, who is at the London Zoological Society, is doing a massive project on climate change and wild dogs. And she was unfortunately in the field and couldn't submit an article to the book, but certainly at that stage, her first article published paper was on hot dogs. And literally the dogs, they are suffering from climate change. And we are looking at now, she's looking at the details of how they're suffering. And one of the ways is that because of the heat, they have to go quite far from the den site to go and hunt. So that if their hunt happens closer to 9 o'clock and it becomes too hot for them to run back to the den, they don't. So they will stay in as cool as they possibly can at the kill site and only return to the den much later in the day when it's now starting to cool down, which means the pups get less food, which means that pup mortality goes up. Can they afford it? The answer is no, but that's what's happening. Do dogs mourn? Yes, they do. And I'll stand by that against any argument about how conscious are animals. They're conscious. We got to this particular stretch of water just as we've been tracking with the dogs, and you can see the pups on the right, the adults on the left, and the lead adult looking all of them are looking incredibly anxious to the left. And the reason is that one of the dogs had been sleeping, it was hot, they went to the river, the lions were there, so they rushed up to this pond and to this little pool. And one of their dogs was just not being observant and was taken by a crocodile. The crocodile snuck up, took its paw and grabbed it. And the dogs, as I've explained, live a close pack social life. And they were now really calling out the whoo, whoo sound, which they do to call when one's gone, they've had a kill, and they're now calling everybody to come and eat. And the dog, of course, was not going to respond. There was a sudden, as we were standing there, I was taking these shots, there was a sudden explosion in the water, and I knew what it was the crocodiles all fighting over the carcass, and I could not photograph it. I know some of my photographic colleagues who were there, they photographed it, and the BBC were there at the time, they photographed it. I couldn't. It was just beyond what I could do. And the dogs were really calling and calling, and eventually you can see how the dogs in the middle are so thirsty, they're lapping up at the mud, and eventually a dog just said, okay, come on, we've got to go. They regrouped and they walked, and this is what happens when the dogs really show that they're mourning. Their heads are dropped down, their tails are down. The BBC tracked them that night. They did not hunt. They did hunt the next morning. The dogs in Tanzania came close. They came closer. They looked into my camera lens, and I looked at them. I thought, my goodness, you're just so beautiful, but I wish I knew more about you. Sniffed my toes, got really, really, really close. They are just my best. The thrill, I can't even put into words the thrill of being so close to the wild dogs and feeling so safe with them. And we whispered, no nibbling. They were smelling my toes. I was like, no nibbling. Oh, what's that? Then they came closer. They had to know. They just really had to know. Like this dog, that's me, lying in the dirt with the dog looking at me. What? This is a pup that had come really close. The pup eventually sat down and became it was immortalized as the cover of my book. So Africa's Wild Dogs, a survival story. It's available. There's a story here and it's linked to Bristol. My designer lives in Bristol. One of my editors lives in Cambridge. My publishing house, Merlin Unwin, are in Shropshire. So I'm very connected to the UK. And I am in Cape Town, and my photographic editor is in Cape Town. We put the book together, and we finished it in March 2019, just as the world started going crazy, and we started all this lockdown story. And we, as an international virtual team, put this book together. It was printed in China and then shipped to Penguin Random House to do distribution in South Africa and into Africa, and Merlin Unwin into the UK and the United States. And I'm happy to tell you that we work very well as a team. And the book is, I'm happy to say, it's very widely available online. So, and yeah, now the big news. We're having a conference. And I do invite you all to come to the conference. It's 14th to 18th February. We're starting it on Valentine's Day. And so save that week. It's virtual. When I say we've labeled ourselves African Wild Dogs United. We've got Professor Dr. Rosie Woodruff from London Zoological Society, London Zoological Society. She is one of our main bodies involved. From Zimbabwe, Zambia, from Zurich University, of course, Endangered Wildlife Trust from South Africa, Africa's Wild Dog Survival Fund, my organization, Botswana Predator Conservation. We all come together to pool our resources to make known what is going on in the wild dog world, more and broader than what I've given you. And it's an opportunity for students to come forward and to give abstracts, to present abstracts. We're also looking for the next generation of African researchers to come in. So we are raising money for them to get to an area where there's internet. I mean, something that we take for granted, where there's internet so that they can present if their abstract is accepted, or they can at least attend the conference. So it's a collective effort by all of those top people involved, and organizations in Australia, people doing research in Australia, coming together to promote African wild dogs. And we do encourage you and invite you to participate, give us your submissions, and come and take place. I want to thank you so much for joining me and the tail end. And look at those gorgeous bushy tails. Aren't they wonderful? And I look forward to answering all your questions. Thank you.
Jocelin, thank you very much indeed for a very fascinating talk, for all of your wonderful stories and photographs. So now it's time to throw this open to anyone who has a question for Jocelin. So I'm going to... So if you wish, you can type your question into the chat, or if you wish, you can unmute yourself and ask away. We just had, just letting you know that we had a comment earlier from Anne P, who says, Jane Goodall was married to Hugo van Lawick and then Derek Brykson.
Thanks very much for that. Yes, Hugo van Lawick, he was a fantastic photographer and an observer. And he was the one who first started observing the behavior of the dogs in Tanzania. Their son, they're called Grub, he was brought up in Tanzania, and they actually they rescued a wild dog pup. And if you can get hold of that book, of their first book, again, the name's gone, I'm sure that same person can tell us. It's a fascinating story of how they rescued this one pup. It's called Solo, there we go. It's called Solo, and it was all about how there were two females in the pack. The alpha female gave birth, and a minor female had been impregnated by one of the males. She gave birth, and the alpha female was angry about that. She literally killed every single one of those pups. She wouldn't allow the pack to feed the second female. She was vicious about it. She was angry. Her domain had been infringed upon, and her reign was, she felt under threat. And there was this one tiny little pup that survived because they took hold of this pup and kept it for a couple of days, so that it fed it up and then re-released it, and it's hopefully it survived. But yes, Jane Goodall was very involved. Thank you. Thanks for that. Oh.
Thank you, Jocelin. We have a question from Victoria Ash. Victoria, yeah, feel free to go ahead and ask.
Yes. Hello, Jocelin. Thank you for a really, really interesting talk. A couple of, questions. One, an observation. I feel incredibly fortunate to have seen wild dogs in the wild in the Laikipia area in Kenya. I don't know whether you have had any connection with the people who are doing research there, which was fascinating. But my main question was actually related to your point about veterinary fees, and I'm just interested in, how you judge the ethics really of, treating what are essentially wild animals.
Okay, so a vet is necessary when there's a relocation. The dog has to be darted. They have to be, their vitals have got to be tested all the time to make sure that they're stable from the moment that they're darted to the moment that they're woken up. So that's where we have a vet involved. Also, if a dog is in a snare, they need to be darted to remove the snare, and they are given an antidote very, very quickly. So it's not they're not being darted to, the vet is not attending to them in terms of doing major surgery on the animals. They are being darted for a survival process, and that we feel is totally acceptable. And as part of it, I hope that that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you. That's very helpful. I mean, I guess, you know, there's I mean, I know that the pack in Laikipia suffered very badly from canine distemper, but I think that they have recovered, which is encouraging. But I guess it must be tough for people who love them to watch them suffering and you know, judging if or when to intervene. It must be quite hard.
It's very hard. And yes, I think Rosie was involved in that. It was in December, I think 2019. There was a big distemper outbreak in Laikipia. And what happens in that instance is that, yes, they will go in and they will administer to the dogs because they're so endangered. There have been various approaches to this and there are various discussions going on. Do you inoculate? Do you not inoculate? What do you really do? In some countries, they inoculate the pups. In others, they will do the adults and the pups. So, you know, is this an interference or is it saving the animals because they're so endangered? So it's a debate that's carrying on. But so, yeah, you have conflict, and you have agreement. So, but that's what's going on.
Thank you.
Sure.
And thanks very much, Victoria, for the question.
Thank you.
I've got a question from Shaylin, which is actually similar to a question that I wanted to ask. So Shaylin asks, you said the community fears the dogs. Are there any initiatives involving the community in an effort to change perceptions, gain support? Also, what existing conservation measures would you most attribute to success in increasing pack sizes / populations?
Right, it's quite a long question. Okay, so if I don't answer all of it, please come back with the section that I don't answer so I get into answering. So to start with, the Waterberg Conservation Organization, they have been incredibly successful working with the farmers and the community. So what they have done is they set up, for example, a WhatsApp group of the farmers. So when the dogs enter onto a farm, and these farms are vast, they're huge, that far, and the dogs are spotted, they'll immediately alert everybody that the dogs are on the move. When it comes to the communities, there are various organizations that all the organizations working with wild dogs, working with predators, have educational programs where they bring the kids from the local communities, and I'm talking the indigenous populations here, they bring them in, they sit them down, they teach them about the animals, and they teach them about the dogs, they teach them about predators, they teach them how to track them. So it's a full-on education program. There's in the Waterberg, there's Lapalalo, which is a not-for-profit organization, and they're running a school where kids are brought in from all different communities, from Johannesburg, from all around, indigenous populations and the like, to learn about wildlife. So yes, there is an enormous amount of education going. Also in areas where you've got tribal chiefs. Once the chief, and there's huge amount of interface going with the chief and education going, and once the chief is on board, then the community is on board. So then the chief will have a phone and he will let the monitors know that the dogs have broken in, they're in the community, and immediately, as fast as possible, helicopters are sent in. It depends on what the situation is, but if it demands a helicopter to go in, drop a drag net to get the dogs, they will do that. We've got an organization called Wildlife Act, and they act incredibly fast. And again, if the dogs have got to be tranquilized, they are tranquilized from the helicopter, knocked out, picked up by the ground crew, and got out of that area very, very quickly. So again, it's if the chief is on board, then it's great for the dogs, it's great for any of the leopards, lions, whatever, whichever predator is in the area. If the community leader is not on board, that's where the problems comes in. And so there are people working at it. There are people who've specialized in this. There are loads of research on it. And please tell me I've covered all aspects. Is there an aspect I haven't covered?
I think the main question about the role of community engagement, yeah, you've covered that, and also given a lot of context about wider relations between people and other predators as well. So thank you very much indeed. Jocelin, I'm aware that we're coming towards the end of time. Do you maybe have time to answer one more question?
Yeah.
And then I'll wrap things up. So firstly, I'd like to thank everybody who's here for excellent questions. And I'm sorry that I'm unlikely to be able to get round to all of them. But perhaps, Jocelin, I can forward you some of the messages from the chat later on. So I had a question which was relevant, I suppose, as this is the Bristol Zoological Society. Do you know if there are any prospects of a captive or zoo-reared wild dog ever being successfully released into the wild?
Not from a zoo, because we don't have wild dogs in zoos in Africa. And a dog released, there are wild dogs in zoos in America and in Australia. None of them have been released into the wild, which would be totally lethal for them. They wouldn't survive. What we do have is we often have to boma. Boma is a construct which is like an area where the dogs are safe. So it used to be a rounded structure. Now they are very modern. They are fenced with electric fencing to keep the dogs in, protected from any other predators. And there's a door between two bomas, because if you put males in one and females in the other, you don't want them making happy families when they're not supposed to be mating, but dogs do what dogs do. And the female will come into estrus just simply because there are males in the environment, but they shouldn't, but you can't tell them not to. So yeah, we've had them in bomas. There was an unfortunate situation in one part in KwaZulu-Natal, which is up the east coast of South Africa, where a pack of wild dogs were being a big nuisance, and they were bomaed. And there was a big argument as to who owned the dogs, owned in inverted commas. And the community said that they belonged to them. The reserve said they belonged to them. And so the dogs were bomaed for over a year, which was not healthy for the dogs. And the boma was not particularly big. There was huge, there was a legal process that happened. They went to court, and eventually the dogs were released into the reserve. So there was a process. Let's leave it at that. The dogs took off into the reserve as if they had never been bomaed. So instinct is very, very strong. What would happen in a zoo situation is a big question mark. But again, would there have been lions that were, well, in the 60s, you could buy a lion cub at Harrods. And there's a famous story about two guys who had brought a lion up and lived in London in their flat. And eventually they said, no, well, this lion was taking over the table, so they better, take it back to Africa. And the lion was very, very well integrated back into Kenya. When its original owner went back to Kenya, the lion recognized him the first time, and the second time the lion brought his lioness and cubs to meet his London partner, associate. And so, yeah, animals are extraordinarily resilient. I can't give a judgment on that, what would happen to a wild dog being flown from one of the other continents back to Africa, and how it would behave. And would it be accepted by a pack? Would it be integrated? Would it have to find a lone partner, if it's the female find a lone male, would they be able to get together? Who knows? These are good questions. And is it an experiment that one would embark on? I can't answer that. But yeah.
Thank you, Jocelin. So as I mentioned, there are lots more good questions in the chat, but I think as we've kind of come to the end of time, we'll maybe bring the lecture to a close. So firstly, I want to thank you again for your excellent talk. I want to thank everybody that's joined us this evening, and also for your great questions. I want to apologise as well. My intention was to post this talk to the Bristol Zoological Society Facebook page. I wasn't able to access that, so I've had to just post it to my own personal page and share it with the Bristol Zoo page. Apologies for that. But then the last thing that I want to end on is that I won't be doing the Bristol Zoological Society online conservation lectures anymore. I've had a fantastic time doing it. I've enjoyed it greatly. Dr. Tim Bray was the person that used to do them in person at Bristol Zoo. But I just want Dr. Sam Penny, are you here? Yes, there you are. Okay, yeah. Sam, do you want to? Hi. I just wanted to quickly introduce you to everyone and just say that you're going to be the new person in charge of Bristol Zoo Conservation Lectures. So I'll maybe just hand over to you very briefly if you want to say a couple of words.
No, thanks very much, Mark. So my name's Sam, and I'll be taking over. So our next talks from next year will start in February, yet to be announced, with the announcement hopefully going out in January over what that will be. But we've got some exciting plans for the coming year's talks. Hopefully with a lot of stuff based on our own Bristol Zoo based conservation programs, both international and local. So we should have some exciting things to look forward to. But I'm very much looking forward to hosting them and hopefully see a lot of the people here back in February now. So a long way away, but I'm sure it'll be here very soon.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Jocelin.